She had one way out and $6 to take it. For 4 years, Petra Dunne had lived inside a house that looked like prosperity from the road and felt like a held breath from the inside. Her husband gave sermons at the First Methodist Church of Dalton Creek, Wyoming, every Sunday morning, and on Sunday evenings he came home and reminded her, in the particular quiet way he had, exactly who she belonged to. The whole town of Dalton Creek knew. The doctor knew. The Reverend's own deacon knew. The women at the dry goods counter knew, because they had seen her face on Mondays and had learned to find something else to look at. Because Hector Dunne owned the largest cattle operation in Crow County, sat on the town council, and had personally funded the new schoolhouse. And in a town like Dalton Creek, a man who funded the schoolhouse was not a man you questioned out loud. But on a Tuesday in late October, a stranger rode into Dalton Creek on a horse the color of dark creek water, and Petra Dunne's life cracked open like frozen ground in a late thaw. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why the most dangerous thing Petra ever did wasn't the night she ran. It was the morning she decided she was worth running for. The Dunne household sat at the end of Millbrook Road. 2 stories, a wide porch, geraniums in the window boxes that Petra planted and watered and kept alive because they were the only living things in that house she had full jurisdiction over. She was 26 years old and she had learned to move through rooms the way water moves around stone, quietly, without demanding anything from the obstacle. The hardware store on Clement Street was where it started. Petra had been sent to collect a receipt for lumber Hector had ordered, a task designed to look like independence and function like a leash. She knew the shape of that particular errand. She knew all of them by now. Boyd Latimer was behind the counter. He was 60 years old, gone thick through the middle, with the permanently careful eyes of a man who had spent a long career watching things he didn't know how to stop. He handed her the receipt without being asked. She thanked him. She turned to go. The man was standing by the shelving near the door, looking at coils of rope with the focused attention of someone who actually needed rope, not the performance of a man killing time. He was tall in a plain, functional way. Dark coat, road dust on the shoulders, a face that had been arranged by weather and work into something angular and specific. She didn't know him. Dalton Creek was not a town with a lot of unknowns, which meant he had come through on the freight road and stopped, which happened occasionally, and was usually unremarkable. She moved toward the door. She was a step past him when Hector came in. She knew from the temperature of the air before she heard the door. 3 years of that. You develop a sensitivity to it the way you develop a sensitivity to weather. Certain kinds of clouds meant certain kinds of evening. The particular set of Hector's jaw when he was doing the public version of himself and had found something to be displeased about in private. Petra, he said. His voice was the controlled, almost warm voice. The voice she had privately catalogued as the Tuesday voice, the one he used when he needed witnesses nearby to see a reasonable man. She turned. Hector Dunne was 44 years old, broad through the chest, well-dressed for a Wyoming cattle town. He had a preacher's gift for making a room feel like it was his. He looked at the receipt in her hand, and then at her face, and then at Boyd Latimer, with the particular expression of a man doing 3 calculations simultaneously. I was looking for you, he said, which was not true, because he had known exactly where she was, because he had sent her there. Receipts here, she said, all in order. He took it from her hand almost gently, which was sometimes the tell. The gentleness that meant he was performing patience for an audience. He looked at it with the same expression he brought to most things she did, the expression of a man reviewing work and finding it technically acceptable and personally insufficient. She moved toward the door again. His hand closed on her arm above the elbow. Not hard. That was the calibration. Firm enough to mean something, not hard enough to be visible. I thought we were going to look at the saddle tack together, he said. His voice was still pleasant, still public. Petra said nothing. She had learned that silence was the shortest path through most situations. The stranger by the rope coils looked up. Let go of her arm, he said. The words landed in the hardware store on Clement Street the way a stone lands in still water. The ripples went everywhere at once. Boyd Latimer found something to do in the back. A woman who had been looking at hand tools became very interested in the floor. The stock boy near the window stopped breathing. Hector turned his head toward the stranger with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who has just heard something he hasn't decided how to process yet. Pardon me, Hector said. The stranger hadn't moved. His hands were at his sides. Let go of her arm. He said it exactly the same way the second time. No escalation, no performance, just the same words, the same register, the same steady delivery of a thing that should have been obvious and wasn't. Hector released her arm, not because he had listened, because he needed both hands. Do you have any idea, Hector began, who you're speaking to? Yep, said the stranger. That was all, one word. Hector stared at him, and the stranger looked back, and the silence between them was the loudest thing that had happened in that hardware store in years. Hector moved fast. Petra had seen him move fast before. She had learned to read the specific compression of his right shoulder that preceded it. The stranger read it faster. He caught Hector's wrist mid-swing, held it, and squeezed with a grip that was doing something quiet and serious to the bones in Hector's hand. Hector made a sound she had never heard from him before. Small, involuntary, escaping before he could stop it. Easy, said the stranger. Nobody needs to do anything else today. Hector's face had gone white at the jaw and red at the cheekbones. He looked at his own wrist in the stranger's grip with an expression she would spend a long time thinking about afterward. Not just anger, something underneath the anger that she had never seen on his face before. Something that lived in the same neighborhood as disbelief. The stranger released him. Hector straightened his coat. He picked up his hat, which had fallen. He set it back on his head with the careful, deliberate movements of a man who is reconstructing himself from the pieces. He looked at Petra. He looked at the stranger. He looked at the room. "We'll discuss this at home," he said to her. Quiet, flat. She didn't look at the stranger. She couldn't afford to. But as she passed through the door into the cold October air, she heard Boyd Latimer say, in a voice she had never heard from him before, something that sounded like a man finally exhaling after holding his breath for years. "Lord," he said. Somebody finally said it. The ride home was 4 miles of silence so complete it had a texture. Hector rode ahead, she followed. The cottonwoods along the creek road had gone yellow, and some of them had started dropping their leaves, and the road was covered in them, wet and dark, and the horses moved through with a sound like something slowly giving way. What came after that evening lasted 30 minutes. When it was done, she lay on the kitchen floor and counted the ceiling boards out of old habit. 12. She had counted them so many times she no longer needed to look. She breathed carefully around her left side, where the rib told her in its particular language that it was cracked, possibly the same one as before, and looked at the ceiling and thought about the stranger in the hardware store. Let go of her arm. 4 words. Not a request. Not a performance. Just a statement of how things were going to be, delivered to a man who had never in his adult life encountered a statement like that without a way to dismantle it. She thought about the sound Hector had made. She had not heard Hector Dunne make an involuntary sound in 4 years. She got up eventually, because the floor was cold and getting up was what she did. She cleaned the kitchen, she went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about the $14 in the lining of her winter coat, the $11 in the gap behind the loose stone in the root cellar, and the $9 under the floorboard in the wardrobe room. $34. She had been saving since the end of the first year in the same way a person in a flooding room saves. Not because they have a plan, because it is the only action available that moves in the right direction. $34. It was not enough. It had never been enough. But it was 34 more than she'd had. On the day she said yes in the First Methodist Church of Dalton Creek, Wyoming, in a dress her mother had made, in front of a congregation that had looked at her with the warm, collective approval of people who believed they were witnessing something good. She had been 22 years old. She had believed it too. 3 years before the wedding, her mother had died of a fever that the doctor in Dalton Creek had not been able to treat in time. 2 years before the wedding, her father had borrowed money from Hector Dunne to keep the freight business running through a bad winter, and the debt had grown the way debts grow, when the person holding the note is patient and strategic, and in no hurry at all. By the time Hector made his proposal, her father owed him $400, and Hector had made it clear, in the gracious, inevitable way he did most things, that the proposal and the debt were not entirely separate conversations. She had said yes, she had been wrong, and she had spent 4 years paying for that wrongness in a currency that didn't appear in any ledger her father would have recognized. The marriage had shown itself gradually. That was the thing she had not known to expect. Not all at once. First the management of her time. Then the management of her friendships, which became first inconvenient and then impossible. Then his sister, Petra Dunne, installed in the house under the explanation of helping with the household, who was actually the most precise instrument of psychological pressure Petra had ever encountered. Vera could make you feel that a locked door was for your own protection, that a bruise was evidence of love's intensity. She could make you say thank you for things you should have been screaming about, and she could make you say it sincerely, which was the part that haunted Petra in the small hours, the moments when she had heard her own voice speaking in Vera's language and had not caught it until after. The money was her own voice made into something she could hold in her hand. She did not have a plan beyond out. Out was cold and large and full of its own dangers. But staying was its own trajectory with its own ending, and she had looked at that ending long enough to know she could not keep looking at it. The morning after the hardware store, Vera was in the kitchen when Petra came down. Vera Dunne was 51 years old and had the posture of a woman who had decided righteousness was a physical condition and had maintained it accordingly. She was small and precise, with gray hair and the flat, assessing eyes of someone who had spent decades studying people for the specific purpose of finding out what they were most afraid of. She poured coffee. She talked about the Aldersons' fence dispute on the north edge of town. She did not mention what had happened the previous evening. Vera never mentioned things directly. Mention was for people who needed to be explicit. Vera operated in the space between sentences. Hector is going to Cheyenne, she said eventually. Next week. Business with the land office. He'll be gone 5 days. Petra drank her coffee. He'll want the household accounts kept while he's away. Under my oversight, of course. Of course, Petra said. Vera looked at her over the rim of her cup. You know, she said in the particular tone she used when she was about to say something designed to sound like concern and function like a wall, that Hector worries about you. His temper comes from somewhere real. From fear, really. Of losing you. I know, Petra said, because there was no other answer available in that kitchen on that morning. Because the true answer, that what Hector feared, was not losing her but losing ownership of her, which were different things entirely, was not a sentence she could say inside that house without compounding everything. What she thought underneath, in the part of herself she kept small and quiet and specifically protected, was 5 days. Hector did not go to Cheyenne on the scheduled day. He went 2 days early, which Vera appeared not to have known, based on the specific quality of her expression when his horse came back up the road 3 days later instead of 5. Whatever Hector had decided, he had decided alone. He called Petra to his study after supper. The study smelled like leather and wood smoke, and the particular authority of a man who had arranged his environment to reflect his opinion of himself. He sat behind the desk. He gestured to the chair across from it she sat. Something had settled in him. She noticed it the way you notice a change in the way water sounds before a storm. Some decision had been made and accepted, and the thing that had been coiled and unpredictable behind his eyes had resolved into something more purposeful, which she understood instinctively was more dangerous. I want to talk about your situation, he said. She waited. I've been thinking, he continued, that our arrangement is not serving either of us well. You're unhappy in Dalton Creek. I understand that. The town is limiting for a woman of your particular temperament. She kept her face exactly where it was. I have a business associate, he said, in Colorado. He manages certain establishments near the mining settlements. He paused, choosing words with the care of a man who knows the words are the easy part and is saving his energy for what comes after. He's always looking for women who are capable and presentable, and in need of a fresh start, she heard the words. There was a delay of perhaps 4 seconds between the hearing and the understanding, a white silence in which her mind simply refused to accept the sentence, and then the delay ended and the sentence arrived, and she understood it completely, and the room did something strange, went distant, as if it had relocated itself 6 inches to the left of where she was sitting. He kept talking. She let him talk until she said his name, Hector. He stopped. When? She said. He looked at her carefully. Spring, he said, February at the latest. The roads will be clear enough by then. She stood up. He stood up too, the automatic reflex of a man who controlled space as a primary tactic, who understood that letting her move unpredictably was a concession he didn't make. Sit down, he said. No. The word came out of her like something that had been stored under pressure for a very long time and had finally found the crack it needed. She left the study. She walked down the hall. She went into the kitchen and stood at the basin and held the edge of it with both hands and breathed. February. She had until February. No, she corrected herself. She did not have until February. She had whatever time it took for Hector to decide that February was inconveniently far away, and Hector Dunne had never in his life waited patiently for something he had already decided to take. She let go of the basin. She went to the root cellar. She went to the wardrobe room. She went to the coat. $34. Hector kept a revolver in the locked box in the hall cabinet. She knew where the key was because she had spent 4 years cataloging every piece of information that might someday matter. She took the key. She opened the box. She took the revolver and the box of cartridges beside it. She listened to the house. Hector was in the study. Vera's room was at the far end of the upstairs hall. The stable hand slept above the livery barn, 300 yards from the main house. She went to the back door. She opened it. The October night came through the door like a living thing, cold and immediate, carrying the smell of frost and dry grass and the particular darkness of open country that is not the darkness of a clouded sky over a town, but the darkness of a landscape that has simply removed the light and does not see why you should expect otherwise. She stood in the doorway for a moment. The warmth of the house was at her back. The darkness and the cold were at her front. She understood with complete, almost hallucinatory clarity that she was about to step out of everything that was known and into everything that was not. She stepped out. She took the bay mare from the second stall, not the black, which was Hector's, and would be missed faster. The mare was steady and familiar with night and did not make noise about being saddled. Petra's hand shook on the girth buckle. She missed it twice. She got it on the third try and led the mare out into the dark and mounted and turned her north, toward the freight road, and whatever was past it. The first mile was open country, the second was the creek crossing, which she managed without incident. The third was where the road curved west through a stand of dead cottonwoods, and she lost the track for nearly 20 minutes, walking the mare through scrub in the dark. Navigating by the feel of the ground and the particular stubbornness that had always been her least flattering quality and was currently keeping her alive. The fourth mile was where the cold stopped being a condition and started being a character. It came through her coat at the collar and the cuffs and the place where her boots met her ankles, systematic and patient, working inward with the efficiency of something that has done this before and knows the weak points. She did not hear the rider until he was beside her. She had the revolver out before she fully understood she'd moved. Her hands were steadier than she expected. She aimed at the shape in the darkness and said, "Stop right there." The shape stopped. "It's me," said a voice she had heard that morning and not expected to hear again. "The hardware store. Rope coils." Her arm did not lower immediately. "How?" she started. "Latimer sent word," he said. "Said you might need help getting out." He paused. "I told him I'd watch the road." She looked at him in the dark. She could not see his face clearly. She could see the line of him, the horse, the dark coat, the particular stillness of a man who was not afraid of a gun pointed at him because he had calculated the situation accurately and knew she was not going to fire. She lowered the revolver. He didn't ask her any questions. He turned his horse north and she followed, and they rode without speaking for a long time, and the cold was serious, and the road was dark, and the stars were very clear and very far away. His name was Cormac Briggs. He told her that, after they had ridden an hour and stopped to rest the horses in the lee of a limestone shelf that broke the wind sufficiently to make talking possible. He was a freighter by trade, passing through Dalton Creek for the third time that year on the Cheyenne Run. He had known of her, he said. The way you know of things in small towns when you're an outsider passing through and people say things in your hearing that they wouldn't say to each other. "What did they say?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. He was not a man who answered questions he hadn't thought about. "Enough," he said. They said enough. He had a lean-to camp 12 miles north, where the freight road bent toward the river crossing. He'd been wintering supplies there before the Cheyenne push. There was a fire and a canvas shelter and food, which was not comfort in any formal sense, but was more than the open road in October, and she accepted it without embarrassment, because she had learned over 4 years that pride about accepting help was a thing cultivated by people who had never desperately needed it. She told him about Colorado that night, not because she had planned to, because she had been carrying it alone for 3 hours, and it was very heavy, and he was there, and he was listening. She told him about the study, the desk, the word arrangement, the business associate, the particular quality of Hector's voice when he explained that February was the timeline, and how that voice had contained no awareness of how it sounded, no recognition that what he was describing was not a business transaction but the disposal of a person. Cormac listened. He did not do anything with his face that required her to manage his reaction. He just looked at the fire and let her talk, which was rarer than it should have been. When she finished, he said the sister knew. "Vera," Petra said. "Yes, she always knows. Planned it, maybe." She helped introduce him to the man in Colorado. "She's known him longer than Hector has." She paused. "Vera makes things possible. Hector makes decisions. But the decisions need a structure to operate in, and Vera has always been that structure." She looked at her hands in the firelight. $34 was in her coat. She could feel the weight of it, which was not much weight and was also everything. "There's a town," Cormac said after a while, 12 miles east of the river crossing, called Overton, not Crow County. Different judge, different sheriff, town's big enough to have work in it. She nodded. "But you're thinking about Colorado," he said. "I'm thinking about the man in Colorado," she said. "About what happens when Hector can't deliver on the arrangement he made. About whether that makes the problem better, or whether it makes it travel." He was quiet. "That's worth thinking about." She had thought about it for 4 years in various forms. She had spent 4 years in a house with a man who solved problems by escalation, who responded to any form of resistance not by retreating but by increasing pressure, and she understood that running was not the same as being safe, and that distance and safety were related but not identical, and that knowing the difference was the thing she needed most right now and had the least resources to figure out. She slept a few hours. When she woke, it was still dark, and Cormac was awake, tending the fire, and she lay still for a moment and did the inventory she had done every morning for 4 years. Left side. The rib was cracked, she was now certain. Her hands were cold but functional. The revolver was in her coat pocket, $34. In the morning he told her what he had by way of resources. 2 horses, one of which was considerably better than the other, and she understood without needing it said that the better one was the one she'd take. Provisions for the road. $41 in a tobacco tin, which he set on the ground between them without ceremony, the way you add a number to a column. That's yours, he said, before she could say anything. She looked at it. Cormac, she started. I know the Cheyenne run well enough to resupply in Overton, he said, and the horse was overdue for a replacement. He said it simply, and then picked up the coffee pot and didn't say anything else about it, which was the right move, because if he had elaborated, she would have had to refuse it, and she didn't want to refuse it. $75, she said. 75, he agreed. They broke camp by mid-morning. She had told him about Vera that morning, the full version, not the abbreviated one she'd offered the night before. The particular cruelty of a woman who had spent decades making herself indispensable to a brutal man by providing him the vocabulary for his brutality. Who could reframe every act of violence as an act of love so thoroughly that sometimes the person being hurt borrowed the frame? Who believed, Petra thought, all of it? That was the thing. Vera Dunne was not performing conviction. She lived inside it. He's going to come, Petra said when they were a mile out of camp and moving east. Yes, Cormac said. He has money and men and the sheriff. The sheriff's a Crow County problem, Cormac said. Overton's not Crow County. She looked at the country around them. The cottonwoods were almost bare. The frost was still on the north-facing grasses. Somewhere behind her, 4 miles south, Hector Dunne was going to walk into a house that had her absence in it, and he was going to do the thing he always did when something he owned was not where he expected it to be. He won't wait, she said. No, Cormac agreed. He won't. They reached Overton by the following afternoon. It was a proper town, 2 main streets, a hotel, a sheriff's office with a man in it who looked up when they rode past, with the neutral assessment of someone doing a job, not guarding someone else's interests. She noticed the difference immediately. The quality of being looked at without being catalogued. They took rooms at the hotel, separate rooms, which did not require discussion. She paid for her own. $22 left. She spent 2 days in Overton. She asked about work at the hotel, and was told they were looking for someone who could keep accounts, which she could, because she had been excellent at figures since before she could explain why, and which she had been doing under Hector's oversight for 4 years, and could therefore do in her sleep. She agreed to a 3-day trial. By the end of the first day, it was clear there was going to be a permanent position. On the evening of the second day, Hector rode into Overton with 2 men she recognized from his property and the Crow County Sheriff. She saw them from the hotel window. She went downstairs and found Cormac in the dining room and said quietly, "He's here." He nodded once and set down his coffee and stood up. The sheriff of Overton was a man named Aldous Rye, broad and deliberate, who had been doing his job in his county for 11 years and had a specific expression for Crow County men who came across the line with demands. She had not seen that expression before, but she understood it immediately. It was the expression of a man who knew exactly where his jurisdiction ended and had no intention of pretending otherwise. Hector presented his case to Aldous Rye in the street, and she watched from the hotel window as Rye listened with his arms crossed, and the particular patience of a man who is deciding something. Cormac was in the street beside Rye. He was not doing anything. He was simply there, which was its own kind of statement. Hector's 2 men hung back. She could see them calculating. The calculus of hired men in an unfamiliar county without legal cover was not complicated. Rye said something to Hector. She couldn't hear it. Hector's posture changed in a way she recognized. The controlled exterior compressing inward, looking for the angle, the leverage, the argument that would work. She watched him not find one. They left. All 4 of them, back across the county line, back toward Dalton Creek and Vera and the study and the geraniums in the window boxes that nobody was going to water now. She stood at the window for a long time after they were gone. Cormac came back inside. He didn't make an announcement of it. He just came in and went to the dining room, and she went downstairs and sat across the table from him and looked at the surface of it, the ordinary wood grain of a table in a hotel in a county that was not Crow County. He's going to try again, she said. Through Vera, maybe. Through the Colorado man, if the arrangement gets complicated without me in it. Probably, Cormac said. So I need to be further than Overton when he does. He looked at her. There's work all the way to the coast if you want it. Oregon, California. Towns that aren't connected to Wyoming cattlemen by anything except the mail. He turned his cup in his hands. The coast has its own weather, its own problems. But it's a long way from Crow County. She thought about the hotel, the 2 days she'd spent in Overton. The account books, which were a mess, which she had been quietly reorganizing, because it was the kind of problem that made sense to her, the kind of problem that had a correct answer if you were patient enough to find it. The way the hotel manager had looked at her on the evening of the first day, when she had identified a recurring error in the freight invoices that had been costing him money for 2 years. She thought about how strange it was to be in a room where a man noticed something she did, and the quality of his attention was not ownership but something she had almost forgotten existed: recognition.
"How far west have you been?" she asked Cormac.
He thought about it.
He was always honest about what he had and hadn't seen. "To the Nevada line once," he said. "I have a run that goes to Salt Lake. From there it's other men's routes." She looked at the window. The street outside was ordinary.
Just a street. Just October in a Wyoming town that wasn't the one she'd spent 4 years in. It looked unremarkable, which was the point. Unremarkable meant no one was watching the clock to see if she got home on time.
"I need a week," she said,
"to finish the accounts here and collect what I'm owed. And then," she stopped. She was not accustomed to finishing sentences about the future in the present tense. She had spent 4 years in a house where the future was not a thing she was invited to have opinions about. "And then what?" Cormac asked, not pressingly, just asking. "And then west," she said, "as far as the money takes me. Further than Hector's reach."
He nodded once,
The way he nodded when
something was decided, and there was no need to say more about it. She stayed the week. She kept the accounts.
She was paid on the Friday, and she added it to what remained and counted it twice at the table in her room and came out to $79, which was not a fortune but was a direction.
She bought a better coat and a pair of boots that fit properly,
which her old ones had not, which she had been living with for 2 years without fully accounting for how much energy the simple act of cold feet consumed. On the Saturday morning, she went to the sheriff's office and told Aldous Rye what she knew about Hector Dunne and the man in Colorado and the arrangement that had been planned for February. She told it plainly and without ornamentation, and Rye listened with the same arms-crossed patience and wrote things down, and she did not know what he would do with it and could not stay to find out. But she told him because someone needed to know, and because the woman who might come after her deserved whatever advantage the telling could provide. Rye looked at her when she finished and said, "I'll write to the Colorado authorities." "That's all I can ask," she said. He looked at her for a moment.
"This is done," he said.
She started slightly at the name, not because she'd forgotten it, because she was going to have to decide something about it. He seemed to understand that, because he just nodded and said, "Safe travels." She left his office and walked out into the cold Saturday morning of Overton, Wyoming, which was the last morning she spent inside Crow County or any county adjacent to it. Cormac was waiting with the horses at the livery. He had restocked provisions and was repacking a saddlebag with the methodical efficiency of someone who had made camp and broken camp enough times to have reduced it to something approaching economy. He didn't look up immediately when she came in. He was counting cartridges into a smaller bag with the focus of someone who understands that the count is not a formality. The revolver was in her coat pocket.
She had kept it there every day since she'd taken it, and she had stopped thinking of it as Hector's revolver and started thinking of it as the thing in her pocket that was hers. "Ready," he said. She looked at the horses.
The bay mare and Cormac's road horse, dark and steady, standing in the ordinary way of animals that have been well kept and know it. The provisions were loaded. The morning was clear and cold, and the sky above the street beyond the livery door was the particular high, hard blue of late October in Wyoming, when the air has been cleaned out by frost and everything is very exact.
"Ready," she said.
They rode out of Overton heading west, and she turned once in the saddle to look back at the street, the hotel, the sheriff's office with its ordinary door, the 2 main streets of a town that had given her a week and a paycheck, and the specific restoration of being trusted with a column of numbers. She looked long enough to remember it properly. Then she turned west and didn't look again. The first day of riding was hard on the rib, which she didn't mention, and hard in other ways that were less physical. She had spent 4 years inside a defined perimeter, and the absence of that perimeter did not feel immediately like freedom. It felt like the first few minutes after a door is unlocked. The door is open. The fact of the open door is real. The body's understanding that the door is open lags behind the fact. She thought about Hector arriving back in Dalton Creek and walking into the study and understanding the precise shape of what was not there. She thought about Vera, who would have already begun constructing the version of events that suited her, the architecture of a reasonable explanation, the careful repositioning of every fact.
Vera would be thorough. Vera was always thorough.
She thought about Boyd Latimer in the hardware store, who had not done anything for 4 years and had finally, on a Tuesday morning in October, sent word to a stranger watching the North Road. She didn't hate him for the 4 years. Afraid people do what afraid people do, and Boyd Latimer had been afraid of a specific and well-founded thing. She just couldn't need anything from him anymore. The miles passed. On the second evening they made camp in a river bend with good timber, and Cormac made coffee and she helped, and neither of them felt it necessary to remark on the fact of the helping, which was the thing she kept coming back to. The absence of remark.
The absence of inventory. The way a simple act could just be a simple act.
She told him about her mother that night, not because it was directly relevant, because they had been riding for 2 days and she trusted him, and the night was quiet, and the fire was going, and she had been carrying her mother for a long time in the particular way you carry a loss that happened before you had the resources to fully process it. She told him what her mother had said about stubbornness once, when Petra was 12 and had refused to give up on a broken-down horse everyone else had written off.
Her mother had called it her best quality and her worst one, and had said it with the particular affection of someone who sees you clearly and loves what they see anyway.
Cormac listened. He had a way of listening that was not performance and not strategy.
Just attention, the real kind. She would have liked you, Petra said,
Meaning her mother.
He turned his cup in his hands. Probably I'd have been afraid of her, he said. She was, Petra agreed, suitably so. They were quiet for a while after that. The fire did what fires do, worked through what it had, rebuilt from the coals, kept going.
She thought about what was west of them. Countries she had not seen, towns without opinions about her, work she could choose, problems she could pick up and put down of her own volition, a coat that fit, boots that kept her feet warm, $79, which was not a fortune but was hers, which was the distinction that had cost her 4 years, and which she intended to spend the rest of her life refusing to take for granted. She thought about February, about the arrangement that was not going to happen in February or any other month, about the man in Colorado, whose name she had told Aldous Rye, and who was now someone else's problem in the most useful possible sense. She thought about Hector walking into Overton and finding Aldous Rye's crossed arms and the county line behind him and nothing on the other side of it that belonged to him.
She thought about what it had felt like to lower the revolver and put it in her pocket and choose distance over the other thing. She had thought about the other thing. She was honest enough to admit she had thought about it with genuine consideration. But she had looked at herself in that moment and understood that she had carried enough. That Hector Dunne did not get to be the weight she spent the rest of her life dragging. He did not get to be the last word in the sentence of who she was. The distance was not forgiveness. She wasn't ready for forgiveness. Forgiveness was its own project, and she hadn't started it. The distance was just the choice she made when she understood that she could leave him smaller and colder, and without his architecture of authority, and still be here. Still be herself. Still be riding west. That was enough.
She was learning, with the stubbornness that had always been her most reliable quality, to believe that it was. Somewhere east of them, back in a county she no longer lived in, things were in motion that she couldn't control and had stopped needing to.
The rib would heal. The coat was warm.
The horse was steady under her. The country ahead was the country she hadn't seen yet, which was frightening in the plain, honest way that all unmapped territory is frightening, and also something else. Something she hadn't had a word for in 4 years. She pulled her coat tighter and looked west and kept riding.